We have an announcement today on new migration measures taken by the government. There's been a huge surge, of course, in migration, in particular students arriving since the borders were reopened because of COVID. The government saying it needs to address that issue as well as longer-term issues with migration. It is about curbing overall numbers, but allowing more necessary skills into the nation as well. This is the Minister talking live, the Home Affairs Minister live in Canberra at the moment. Claire O'Neill, let's go there for some questions.
Free-for-all, where we see young people coming to our country who should be getting a great education and having a great experience, but actually find that they're a victim of a labour scam and getting exploited. Up the back here. So we've put forward measures here that will help us bring net overseas migration back to normal in a very short time frame. They're very significant measures that we're taking here. Things like increasing the English language requirements for students, making sure that the students who are coming here are going to be able to study and going to be able to thrive in our labour market. If we do not succeed in that, of course there are other things that we can do, but I'm confident that the measures we've put together here are being done quickly and that we've caught this problem in time. I would say, I think if we didn't do anything about this problem for several years, we'd be in a situation where we were having to look at things that would be very economically damaging for the nation. Do you want to come here and go ahead?
Yeah, so big universities are really reliant on this revenue they get from international students, which means they can incentivise essentially to kind of do some of these practices, waive English language requirements and admit students who just want to come here for jobs. So how do you address the integrity of tertiary education without taking away that funding that, you know, contributes up to 40% of funding at some universities like the University of Sydney?
We have great partnerships and supporters of what we're doing in the university sector. And the reason for that is that if this sector does not get its integrity issues under control, the sector itself will suffer. We have a good reputation globally as a provider of international education that we should all be concerned about protecting, and the universities are right there with us. They do not want Australia to be known as a country where you come here, you get exploited, you don't get educated properly, and frankly the course that you signed up for wasn't quite what it looked like. So we've got a bit of a repair job here to do, because I have to say when I look at the laissez-faire model that the former government really took to this sector, that's how we ended up with the type of problems that we're talking to you about today. So the things that we are doing are important for that sector. They're generally supported by providers of education, and that's because they know we've got to fix this, otherwise it will really go off the rails.
Minister, so most migration intakes often see people going to the cities rather than the regions. So how are you going to prioritise migrants going to the regions? And then more specifically, in the plan it says that regional visas will have the highest processing priority. What do you actually mean by that? What is the speed up going to take? Is there going to be a sort of specific time frame that they have to be processed by?
So firstly, I just say we've done a huge amount since we came to government to make sure that we're trying to push as hard as we can to reduce the concentration of migrants in our capital cities. I mean, I'm from Melbourne and we're so lucky that we've had generation after generation of migrant communities come and settle in our cities. But when we're talking about housing and infrastructure constraints that are very clearly affecting the lives of our community, it's being felt most acutely in those capital cities. There is a lot more work, though, that has to be done on this, and I say that partly because of those pressures in the cities, but also partly because we've got a situation where our cities are feeling those constraints of population, and a lot of regional parts of our country are crying out for extra people. Now, we have tried over a 7-year period to use the migration system to address that problem, and it's had limited success. What Minister Giles and I are about to embark on is a specific policy project which is focused on that regional question. So we've kind of done everything we can under the current system to make sure that we're sending migrants where they're really needed, but there is more work that needs to be done there, and that's a big focus for us in 2024.
Yeah, look, there's really two things there. Before we get to the processing times, there's the issue of the visa allocations, which is something we've already moved towards, tripling the allocations from those under the former government. There's also the issue of us working much more closely with the states and territories, which is something I touched on in my opening remarks. But there really is an important role for processing directions and processing times. For example, since coming to government, we've been able to direct processing priorities at the highest level for health care and education in the region regions, which means that people in those categories are getting their skills visas turned around in 2 to 3 days, as opposed to the 10 to 11. So it's using all of the incentives in the system, as well as the matters that Claire talked about just then.
And we'll get you some numbers on the regional story. It's quite interesting, actually, what we've achieved so far. Paul, go ahead.
What guarantees are there that we will be training people as we go? For example, could companies accessing the core and essential visa streams or with existing labour migration agreements be required to train Australians and to hire apprentices? And just for the ACTU and BCA, is that something that you would be in favour of?
So we're trying to make it easier for business to get, especially those skills at the very highest levels of the labour market. And the purpose of the specialist skills pathway that we are announcing today is really so that we can get those skills into the country that we can't grow quickly at home, but that we urgently need. Think about people who are working as psychologists who will take otherwise, 10 to 15 years to train. People like cyber specialists who we desperately need here to help the whole of the Australian community skill up on these things. So that's really the focus of the specialist skills pathway. Liam talked a little bit about the focus that the government is taking to put Jobs and Skills Australia at the centre of this discussion within government. So just understand that before we came to government, there was no mechanism for the migration system, the labour market and the education system to coordinate. Nothing. And that's why you end up with a situation where you put electricians on a skills shortage list and they're still there 20 years later. Now, our government's taking a very different approach. We're thinking and planning by sector, and we're doing that in the tripartite way that Liam talked about. And we are using things like our amazing free TAFE offering to help to help make sure that we're growing the skills, not relying on migration to replace labour. So the reason that we're trying to do things like the specialist skills pathway is because those people will not replace Australian workers. They'll come here, they'll build the productivity of those around them, they'll share world's best practice, but we need to use the system only to replace those people, not to say that we're not going to skill up and train people. That's evidently not the government's approach.